Welcome everybody. I have got with me today the very inspiring Andrea Tokaji, and also Michelle Rodgers, a great friend. And we have got the pleasure of talking with Andrea today, who we heard speak recently, really about human rights and where we are at the moment in Western Australia. So Andrea has a fascinating background. She's a human rights advocate who's dedicated her life to speaking up for those who can't speak for themselves, to speak for truth, fight, and really just advocating for freedoms, because she was a refugee from communist Romania. And her experience includes working as a youth pastor, a chaplain and a counsellor in schools. She's a lawyer working in the Attorney General's Department, writing legislation, working with refugees in detention centres across Australia and on Christmas Island. And as a human rights advocate lobbyist, speaking into state and federal parliaments on human rights matters pertaining to vulnerable minorities with Fighting for Justice Foundation in the Australasia region since 2009. She's now running as an independent in the electorate of Baldivis, standing for constitutional rights to the freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of belief, freedom of association, and freedom of conscience. And something that really struck me is her comment in regard to the best interest of the child should always come first. Something that Michelle and I resonate with strongly, and I'm sure many other mothers especially. She's also the first politician that I have heard questioning the measures that are in place in Western Australia and really offering some debate, which is a breath of fresh air. So, welcome, Andrea. What else have I missed? Over to you.
Thanks so much for having me. I think this is a really imperative discussion to have as a society. As you've mentioned, I don't think it's been debated enough in the public sphere. I think that we've taken for granted our freedoms and rights, and also we've actually given way too much power to government. Government are there to represent us. That means that they act in our best interest and they do what we say as citizens, because as citizens, it's the people that elect these representatives into power. So anytime they violate or overstep the bounds of their power, we need to, as the people, restrain them and pull them back. And I really feel that that's what's happening at the moment in Western Australia. Yes, of course, you know, COVID is a terrible thing, but should our fear of COVID equal us surrendering our rights and freedoms? You know, in terms of association, we couldn't hang out with our friends or go to our clubs. We couldn't have freedom of movement. And why? Because one person decided that was the case. You know, in a true democracy, we decide those things together. We've not had this opportunity to debate it. And also, it's unhelpful when we make these blanket laws that just say outright, everyone has to wear a mask, everyone has to isolate. Historically, it's the sick that have been isolated, and also, you know, those kind of laws don't help when it comes to case-by-case circumstances. There's been reports of terrible incidences because of these lockdowns. People have lost their lives and businesses, and that cost economically and socially is far greater, I think, than we give it credit for. We haven't discussed those costs at all.
Yes. Do you have any information on those costs?
So I've been hearing stories that have broken my heart. One story in particular, Natalia is a dentist. And so she's been working in Perth as a dentist, and she was all called over to the Canberra office to do some dentistry work for a client. Upon her arrival back into Perth, she was thrown in prison.
What?
For violating these emergency powers and obviously leaving the state and coming back in. We live in a country where we have the right to move between states freely. And yet this dentist, this professional who travelled for work, was literally thrown in prison, and her dentistry certificate or qualifications has been stripped of her. She's not allowed to practice as a dentist anymore. For what reason? Because she left the state borders and she returned. And so under these emergency powers, people have paid dearly. And for what? We have actually had zero COVID in our community, no community infections at all. It's been in hotels, it's been in hospitals, yes. It's been on the ships that have docked in our shores, but not in our community. And that is wonderful.
So just on that, Andrea, what's kind of perplexed me with my background in science is that WA is very dispersely populated.
Yes.
And we get a lot of sunshine. So naturally, we should be a little bit more, the virus hasn't got the chance to spread so quickly, I guess. But there doesn't seem to be any consideration taken into that. Do you have any information on why that is? Like, why is that not considered?
So, I mean, logic tells us really that sunshine actually is good for us. Not only the vitamin D part, but it does kill off germs. And of course, fresh air is the same. When you contain people in a small environment, that's when they get even more sick. And hospitals, unfortunately, are an example of that, naturally. So look, I think that a lot of logic has gone out the window during this whole process because people are afraid. And so I want to challenge all of us and say, okay, let's just throw off this blanket of fear, because we've all been there, right?
Yes.
We're all afraid of what is this virus going to do to my elderly mother who's extremely ill. You know, she's got illnesses that means she's extra vulnerable. And I've been so afraid for her. But you know what? Once we throw off that blanket of fear and we think with reason and rationale, and we think logically about, first of all, the emergency powers. So the emergency powers are such that every 2 weeks, the state government, so the Premier, Mark McGowan, has to justify why he should extend the emergency powers for another 2 weeks. So that means giving evidence, providing a reason. I'm not sure what evidence or reason he's been able to provide to extend emergency powers for the last year. We've been under emergency powers since the 15th of March, 2020. And for the last year, we've been in this state of emergency, which means that he can, with impunity, do whatever he wants, announce whatever he, feels he should or needs to, and restrain our freedoms and rights of movement and association and the rest of it on his decision making. Now, in relation to that, I've been extremely concerned that he hasn't had the Chief Health Medical Officer by his side confirming his restrictions. The reason is, and I have this on good authority, every time the Chief Health Medical Officer has made a decision, Mark McGowan, the Premier of the Labor Party, has gone above and beyond the advice that he's been given. His measures have been more extreme than what he's been advised by the Chief Health Medical Officer. I've also recently come to understand that the most recent lockdown we had here in Western Australia, just a few weeks ago, I think it was about 6 weeks ago, right? We're all in lockdown for one whole week, and then we had to wear masks. And the reason was there was someone with potentially a highly infectious UK strand of the virus. Now, I have it on good authority that this was a false positive.
So how can we be sure of that?
Look,
it's your inside information.
It's a great question. And we actually need to question the Chief Health Medical Officer and also the Premier, who is actually campaigning at the moment. So he is waiting for the people to tell him, yes, I believe in you, I trust your leadership, and I want to re-elect you, or I challenge what you've done to us, our community, and our economy. And we do not agree with the dictatorship-style leadership that you've conducted yourself with. And we need to put these questions to him, as I have on my Facebook page. I've said, Premier, provide evidence, please. Because the way that law works is that we have these inalienable international human rights, right? Yeah. We all have the right to freedom of movement, freedom of conscience, freedom of association, freedom of religion, freedom of belief, right? It's just within us. We have it. And the law has to justify how and why it should be taken from us and to what measure. So it is about proportionality, and it is about justifying why that inalienable right should be taken from that individual or group of people. And so we don't have to justify not taking it away. We have to justify taking it away in the first place. That's how law works. That's how your rights and liberties work. So it is incumbent upon the former Premier at the moment. Parliament is in caretaker mode, so, the election results are unknown. The Premier of Western Australia, Mark McGowan, who's from the Labor Party, who took these extreme measures in several cases and did not provide his community with the evidence that's required.
So for many people, I think, Andrea, if we can just go back to because what's kind of, I guess, I have never really paid a lot of attention to politics, I must admit, but I have been concerned about the 2016 Health Act legislation.
Yes.
And that's very concerning.
Yes.
Because it gives, incredible powers to
Yes.
the state to enter the home and to enforce medical treatments, including vaccination. What are your thoughts on that?
So firstly, 2016, what was with that? Why was this legislation passed in 2016? What need was there? Who dreamt it up in 2016, and what requirement was there? Because the way law works is there's often lobbyists that push for legislative reform. There's often a minister who pushes for change in laws, or there's often a need in society, right? So of which of those categories did this legislation come from? So it is the Public Health Act 2016, and it is section 158. And in there we find that any authorised person, which means that the government can deem anyone really an authorised person, doctor, nurse, police officer, or anyone else, any other public servant they deem to be an authorised person. So this authorised person can restrain, can detain, can force you to take the vaccine, to undergo medical procedures, including stripping you bare, including your underwear. That just seems like a violation of my human dignity, a violation of my right to choose, and a violation of my freedoms and rights as a human being and as an individual. So again, I have it on good authority by a member of Parliament who was there at the time. This piece of legislation undeniably was not debated. What happens in Parliament is they often stack a whole bunch of legislation that needs to be debated and passed, and it's often before the holidays, and they kind of just go, Public Health Act, yep, it's to make sure that the society is kept safe. Yep, good, tick, let's go. Yes. So if legislation is not debated properly, there's a problem. There's a violation on democracy, right? If this section in the legislation was not deeply considered by members of Parliament, they have ignored their role. They have not done their due diligence, not done their job that they're hired for, right? And also, this piece of legislation was not put to the people for consideration and input, because in a true democracy, the people say, yes, this law is fair and just. Yes, we want this law in our society, because they have the opportunity to say to what measure, to what threshold, and how this law will impact us as a community. And what benefit will it bring to us? We never got that opportunity here.
How can sorry, Andrea, how does it get passed if it's not put under that scrutiny? It just gets passed. So basically, they can put whatever law they want in place, ultimately.
Unfortunately, that's how a lot of sneaky laws have passed Parliament. People aren't doing their jobs properly. There's no due diligence. There's no follow through. There's no thorough debate. There's no scrutiny. And just like with any job, we're often overwhelmed by, the important and urgent, category that we need to kind of filter through. And so this makes us question the democratic process within Parliament. And also,
Yes.
into the future, how do we prevent this from occurring ever again? Because it's
So,
not okay on my
yeah.
watch.
No, not of course. But do you have any insight as to why they would put it in place? For what reason?
Great question. And why was it passed in 2016, way before we had COVID, right? Who knows? Who can answer that?
Couldn't have been planned or anything.
How can we change this?
Mm.
Because this is absolutely such a...
It's abhorrent. It's just abhorrent.
Wow.
As soon as anyone ever hears about this, because people don't know, because it's been done obviously under the radar, and people are just shocked and they want it changed. How can we change this?
To be fair, I mean, who really sits there on the website and the parliamentary website and reads legislation? I get it, right? We're all busy with our lives. If it's not brought to our attention, we don't know about it. But the point is, now that you know, it is incumbent on you to do something about it. All of us. So what do? Number one, lobbying. Write to your member of parliament. There's an election on at the moment. Make noises about it. Post about it on Facebook. Speak to your community and say that I'm not going to elect you as a local member unless you change this legislation. So during a campaign is the best time to lobby. After the campaign, then you know who's who in the zoo. Who's got what portfolio. We're targeting the Minister for Health here. We're targeting... let's see, strategically in a state setting, we also need to frame this it's about families and it's about human rights. So any minister that cares about that needs to listen to that. Writing letters, having petitions is a great step, but meeting them face to face, that is so imperative. There's nothing better than sitting across from a member of parliament and saying, I represent 500 people who've signed this petition. I'm here on their behalf, and this is what we want. This is not okay. We elected you. I am your boss, right? As a citizen, you say that. I, as a citizen, am your boss, parliamentarian, and you represent our voice. You do what we know in history, right? The squeaky wheel gets the oil. we need to be squeaky about this, okay? We honestly need to have more public debates, more discussions, because whenever legislation is passed, there's always unintended consequences, right? It's like, oopsies, we didn't intend for that outcome to occur or that loophole to exist in the law. Because to be honest, you can't legislate, you can't write in black and white every scenario under the sun that's going to occur, right? And you can't foresee everything. But I think that with this particular legislation, there was intent. It's intentionally taking away your freedoms, taking away your rights and liberties, and that's not okay.
So from your perspective, Andrea, what are the ramifications of this? Let's be very clear. For those who aren't aware of the legislation, but what are your concerns, especially given your history and your background growing up in Romania?
Yeah, so I am a refugee kid. We actually had to escape because under communism, we were persecuted. We were living on food rations in the 80s. We had a really terrible, tough life. So we thank Australia so much for accepting us. And I'm so forever grateful to be an Aussie. I love being an Aussie. I've obviously worked my behind off to make it worth my parents' while. But, they left everything behind and they sacrificed so much. But ever since I was a little girl, I've been advocating for people less vulnerable because I know what it feels like to be there. I've gone through a lot of trauma and abuse in my life. I know what it is. So what are the ramifications? Can you imagine if this law is actually used? It means that vaccinations could be made mandatory. Authorized persons, whoever they might be, could come into your home to restrain you with rope and cable ties or whatever else, handcuffs, and force you to take the vaccine, take you into a facility, whether it's a hospital or detention center or even mental health, clinic, and force you to undergo these medical experiments, whatever they are, and I'm assuming testing, right? And then to take the vaccine. What kind of a world is that? I'm telling you, it is dictatorship. It is. It sounds like communism to me. And I'm just...
Yeah, totally.
Curious.
And look, Bill Gates has come out and said that, you know, we'll be having these every year and we'll need 3 different vaccines or something along those lines. So it's not just this one vaccine, potentially. Yeah.
Okay, so this makes me furious. We have forgotten about the power of the human body. What happens when we get sick? We kind of get better in a few days, right?
Yeah.
Because we've got everything we need within our body to recover.
Yeah.
We've got the immune system. We've got the fighting antibodies. We've got the white blood cells. We've got all of that happening, right? Our bodies have taught itself to heal. We self-heal. That's who we are as human beings. Yeah. So why are we forgetting that? Why do we need to pump our body full of these chemicals to force us into this comatose state? We can heal. My approach, my personal approach, I'm like organic all the way, right? Yeah. We need to actually boost our immune systems. We need to focus on being healthy and organic and to have strong immune systems so that when we get we get over it.
Yeah.
And why isn't it that we aren't on our televisions aren't being told how to eat well, how to increase our immune systems? Instead, it's just about, this is what I see, it's about fear. It's making everyone scared, and fear decreases your immune system. We need to not wear masks. We need to be in the sun. We need to connect with nature. This boosts our immune system. And we all know this. We have the science behind us. And I was going to ask you, what I see is, I'm not seeing this information. It seems to me that there is censorship going on because you're not getting both sides of the story.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we live in a world where truth is not very common and there is controlled messaging. And again, under communism, the first thing they did is they shot the academics. They got rid of the free thinkers, the entrepreneurs, the business people, because they were a threat to being able to control the people by fear. So we need to, number one, get rid of our fear. Number two, get informed. Do your own research, and don't listen to mainstream media. Honestly, do your own research. Understand from a logical perspective and think ethically as well, right? For the good of our community and our families, we need to get informed, make these informed decisions and share the information that you come across. So yes, we need to focus more on prevention. So the preventative measures we can take are to protect our freedoms and rights and lobby for them, and also prevent, these diseases from affecting us by being healthy individuals. And I totally agree with you. The fear, the anxiety, it's actually causing illnesses. It's actually making people sick. Look at retirement villages. Look at the elderly and people who are isolated anyway. How do you think they're coping under COVID? They've been depressed, and under COVID, they're even more depressed, and that is making them more susceptible. It breaks my heart. So I'm so for preventative measures, and I'm so for positive, ways that we can actually, stay healthy as a community.
So Andrea, where are your best resources? Where do people go for, in your mind, to be informed?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. I posted recently, I'll send you the link actually.
Yeah, great.
A YouTube video, a professionally done lecture of a biochemist, I believe he is, and he has been dealing with vaccines all his life, and he actually said, number one, lockdown doesn't work. Number two, isolating the healthy doesn't work. Number three, the statistics have been skewed because of the tests aren't 100% working either. They're not working 100% of the time, which is problematic, right? Because then if we have statistics that we go off to make these political and economic decisions, we're in danger. We're in danger of being misled or misleading ourselves. So here's an expert that's telling us that we're getting it wrong. And he actually said there is no second wave. It's over. So in history, you know, he proved it, and based on his knowledge and expertise, that yes, COVID, you know, swept through the world, but it's kind of gone, you know?
Yeah.
And so we're now in recovery mode, and we need to act like it.
Yeah.
You know, this is post-conflict.
Yeah.
We need to get back into recovery mode.
Yeah. Yeah. Wise words. It was interesting, before we jumped on, I did a quick look at the Great Plague and the Spanish flu and how long they lasted. It was never longer than a year. And for the Great Plague, the Black Death, there was a spike in September, and then that was basically it back in the 1600s. So, you know, COVID, why is it unique in that sense?
Dragging on. Yeah.
So many wise words. I think it's a great place to wrap up. Anything else that you'd like to share that you'd really like to share with us?
Yeah, look, I think we need to be angry about what's been going on to us, because we've been deceived, we've been lied to, and our freedoms and rights have been taken, and it's not okay. And particularly when legislation is passed with impunity that will affect our freedoms and rights, and we don't really know about it. We haven't had the opportunity to, you know, be included in that conversation. But I don't want us to behave in an angry way. Yes, we need to be angry, but let that be a fuel for positive conversations and positive change and positive outcomes in our community. So let's focus on prevention. Let's focus on, you know, healthy immunity. Let's focus on lobbying and advocacy for our human rights in a positive way. You know, let's let's do the counter of what's been going on in our society. Let's not do this by fear. Let's do this in love.
Andrea, so thank you so much. I mean, everything you say resonates very, very strongly. I wish you all the very best with your campaign. And Baldivis is very lucky to have you. I wish I was in Baldivis at the moment.
Me too.
Yeah.
You're very sweet, ladies.
And Mish, would you like to say anything more?
I would like to say I really wish there was more of you around, because we need this kind of change, I believe, to keep our freedoms, and we need leaders to have that strength and that integrity and that transparency to lead, and just hold that space for people to know that they're okay and they are safe, and to trust themselves, to listen to themselves. It's really important going forward.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrea. All the very best.
So lovely to chat to you, ladies. See you again.
Take care.